From Philadelphia to Chattanooga, Tennessee, over the weekend, we saw more mass shootings across the nation. And once again, people are pushing Congress to act on gun legislation to prevent another mass shooting from happening.
Tonight, we're finding out what kind of legislation is likely to pass. Our Erie News Now Washington, D.C. correspondent Rachel Knapp talked earlier today with a political analyst on this. She's joining us live right now from the U.S. Capitol. Rachel?
Mike and Eva, following a mass shooting, political analysts tell me that there's usually a wave of support and momentum from the public pushing Congress to pass gun legislation. And they say that typically that momentum kind of fades away or fizzles out, but they say this time around it feels a lot different. And so they're kind of outlining what gun legislation they think Congress could pass.
Americans are strongly opposed to people with mental health problems owning guns. About 87% of Americans have said that they would support legislation like that. And we know that Republicans have really made that their battle cry when it comes to gun restrictions, that it's more about mental health and less about the guns. So that's sort of a layup in terms of being able to pass some legislation on that front.
Todd Belt, the director of political management at George Washington University, also adds that extending the federal registry of gun sales is also getting some support. He says in the past Republicans have been opposed to it for privacy reasons, but he says public support for this kind of legislation is growing. However, Belt believes that bans on assault rifles or even a ban on high magazine clips are less likely to make it through, saying that Republicans are strongly against these. We also asked Belt how much influence groups like the NRA have over what kind of legislation gets passed. He says it's not so much as to how much the NRA contributes to members that really matters, but instead it's that they have a strong base of support from voters on gun rights issues.
One of the reasons that the gun rights advocates have been so successful is because they have a very intense minority behind them. They're not the majority, but they are very intensive, and they make their voices felt at the ballot box.
Now, the House is trying to pass their own legislation on gun control, which include things like limiting the magazine size and increase the age for someone who can buy a semi-automatic rifle from 18 to 21 years old and other gun legislation like that. Now, it's likely to pass the House because the Democrats have the numbers. However, it's unlikely that it will pass in the Senate because it might not have the support it needs to pass. But we do know that a small group of bipartisan senators, including Pennsylvania Senator Pat Toomey, they're part of some discussions to try to find some common ground legislation both sides of the aisle could pass on this issue. However, they really haven't said anything as to, yes, we want to pursue this specific kind of legislation.